Well, I guess to be thoroughly polite to the many of you who've shown up early, and I thank you, I guess we'll get started a couple minutes early. My name is Robert Bell. I'm the Executive Director of the Society of Satellite Professionals and also of something called the World Teleport Association. And I'd like to welcome you to the Content Distribution Forum. This is something we produce every year, those two organizations, in cooperation, of course, with the National Association of Broadcasters. From Monday to Wednesday, we will be presenting 12 panel sessions on the business and technology of content distribution, from traditional broadcasting to IPTV, the triple play to mobile video. And on Thursday, then, we'll be providing the playback of the most popular sessions from the first 3 days, and I'd have to say this is going to be one of them. This program is made possible by the sponsorship of leading companies in the business, including Intelsat, which is the world's largest satellite carrier, Inmarsat, which is the global leader in mobile satellite services, Embrato Systems, which offers video processing solutions for HD broadcast cameras and tapeless studios, and Cisco Systems, which is a provider of video, IPTV, cable, and content delivery solutions around the world, not to mention a whole lot else. I also want to thank PSSI Global Services for providing the live and the recorded video coverage of this forum, which is going to be available not only at this second, because we're streaming it, but also from the websites of SSPI and WTA, and you can visit them here in the Central Hall, just down that away, at booth C6448. And finally, if you're interested in learning more about either of those associations, WTA or SSPI, you'll find literature at the rack and at the entrance to our forum. So, we're here to talk about a topic that I've heard talked about a great deal. In fact, I got the idea for the name of this session because I kept having conversations with people that had the following phrase in them. Well, of course, we know at some point all this will just move on to the web and we won't, be doing what we're doing today in television. And so I suddenly thought, well, wait a minute, will we? Is that what's going to happen? And if so, what is it going to take to get it there? Now, I noticed we have a wide range of ages in our audience, which is great. And so I want to start by do a quick poll. So, when will the web kill TV? So I guess the question is, all those who are in favor of having the web kill TV, raise their hands. Oh, a few hands coming up, okay. All those who think that's not such a good idea, raise their hands. Okay, so we got kind of a TV-centric audience here, that's fine. When the first people sat down in our audience were under 30, I thought, oh, they want to find out when. Okay. But everybody does know it's coming ultimately, of course, because television distribution is ultimately about bandwidth, getting enough of it to the right place so that your audience can partake. The question is just how long is it going to take? The question is what would be involved in turning the public internet into a reliable, robust means to deliver television. It's already happening, of course, in terms of low bandwidth media. I think I just heard of numbers. The average YouTube stream is 300 kilobits per second, not exactly HD TV. But this session is going to look into some of the issues surrounding this. What is it really going to take, both from an engineering and, if you will, an infrastructure standpoint, business models, all the hoops that we'd have to jump through to make this happen, if indeed it ever will happen. So, to talk about that, we've got some very interesting gentlemen up here, and I'm going to, rather than trying to mangle their introductions myself, I'm going to ask each of them to introduce himself and to tell you a little bit about his business or background so that you'll understand the point of view that he brings to the discussion. I think I'll start with the gentleman next to me, who is Jeremy Dujardin. He's the Vice President Engineering and co-founder of a company called Genesis Networks. And Jeremy, would you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me. Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Jeremy Dujardin. I'm in charge of the engineering side of Genesis Networks and one of the co-founders. At Genesis, we provide video transmission services for broadcasters and content providers. We focus on two sectors of that business. One is contribution type services, things like breaking news events, sporting events, that need to get from a location back to a master control in real time. So our focus, the focus of our services is over our terrestrial network that spans well over 200 locations globally around the globe, and facilitates real-time video transfers, again for breaking news, sporting events, things of that nature. We also facilitate what I'll call, given the subject of the panel, I'll call traditional television distribution, facilitating uplinks to cable affiliates around the world. We've built and extended our IP backbone into facilities like DirecTV, B-Sky B, Foxtel in Australia, to facilitate global distribution for networks. And again, this is a real-time platform for the linear delivery of traditional television.
Thank you, Jeremy. Seated next to him is Lance Ware, who's the Senior Vice President of Technology for Technicolor Digital Content Delivery. Lance, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So thanks for coming. I essentially manage the technology around Technicolor's digital distribution areas. So Technicolor has a fairly wide array of services, ranging everything from animation with Motion Picture Company and whatnot, post-production, coloration, etc. My group is specifically focused on content distribution in a variety of forms. We run about 232 broadcast channels for a variety of broadcasters worldwide, most of those being ex-US. We do compression and authoring.
Lance, I'm going to ask you to get a little closer to the microphone. The audience was having some trouble hearing you.
Do compression and authoring for most of the major studios and content owners for DVD. We're also one of the world's largest replicators for DVD. And then we also service electronic distribution to consumers kind of on a hosted third-party basis, so business to consumer. So you can imagine that for television shows, catch-up TV, VOD rentals over the internet, as well as pay-per-view. And so that area is probably most relevant to this conversation in terms of when will that shift occur more predominantly, but we're seeing a lot of that going on right now. Thank you, Lance. And seated next to Lance is... sorry, I have to find the gentleman who's not on our list. There he is, Jonathan Howard, Vice President of Business Development for Broadcast and Broadband at Ateme?
Atem.
Atem.
I'm trying to
Pardon.
Atem.
It's a French company.
Exactly. Hi, thanks for coming. Again, my name is Jonathan Howard. I'm the VP of Worldwide Business Development for Atem. And basically what Atem does is we specialize in very, very high-quality H.264 encoding and decoding for multi-distribution. So no matter where your video is going, we try to, as efficiently as possible, compress video and audio and keep it as high quality as we possibly can, whether you're going to an iPhone or you're going to the internet or terrestrial broadcast. So I think a lot of stuff that we're doing is going to be very applicable to this conversation as well.
Good. I hope so. Okay, this is a round table. We're going to be having a discussion up here. When this works well, as I like to tell my panelists, it's like eavesdropping on a really good cocktail party conversation. We would be happy to include you in that. We now have a wireless microphone, finally, which you saw being tested. So if you have a question, put your hand up. If I don't see you, wave it. If I still don't respond, yell at me. But we're very interested in your contributions as well as your questions. Okay. There is a huge amount of video on the World Wide Web. I've recently read about people younger than I starting to use YouTube as a search engine as opposed to Google. So let's go to YouTube and do a search because all we care about is the video part of it. And I think for many people certainly under 20, they probably think that the public internet is actually how we do get our television. And yet we've built a vast and complex distribution network, very, very expensive to operate, as well as a content contribution network. And I just want to start with sort of almost an idiotic question. Why do we do that? It seems increasingly unnecessary to me. So, Jeremy, what the heck are you guys doing over there at Genesis? Why would anybody pay all that money for all those services?
Well, I mean, if you look at the internet delivery today as it stands, I mean, the primary delivery mechanism is for non-real-time
Can I ask you to get a little closer to that microphone?
Sure. It's for non-real-time video broadcast. So, syndicated shows, things of that nature, can be efficiently delivered via the internet. And everybody's familiar with iTunes and Apple TV and the like. And there are mechanisms to now. Even Netflix now has a product where you can download content. But it's non-real time. And to facilitate a real-time broadcast, high-quality broadcast video signal. For the mass population is just not feasible. And from a technical perspective, one of the biggest limitations of the internet is the lack of multicast. Not having the ability to provide a seamless multicast environment via the internet, via the various ISPs, puts in a tremendous burden on the backbone to try and facilitate many IP streams to all the end users. There are content distribution networks like Akamai that help facilitate that type of distribution, but there too then the cost does increase dramatically and can become cost prohibitive in many instances.
That's interesting. Gentlemen?
I mean, I think one of the biggest things that's holding up adoption is for these consumers that are on the internet, they're using YouTube, they're used to consuming on their PCs, but for us to go mainstream, we really need to get it into the living room, into the television. I mean, most people don't want to watch it on the 2-foot UI, as they say, or they really want to see it on the 10-foot. So that's the first problem. I mean, networking and infrastructure and all the things behind it aside, it's not the way most people want to consume their TV right now. And so, we've got to get it so that the devices are in the home, in the living room, where people want to consume their content, because they're already shifting content with DVRs and whatnot. So it's really about getting it where the majority of consumers want to watch it, and that drives your ad base and everything else.
Could I just ask a follow-up question on that? 'Cause I think it's an interesting point. There have been a number of major companies, including Microsoft, Philips, and so forth, all trying to drive this home media server, and it's pretty much an uphill fight at this point. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Actually, yeah. I mean, if you really think about, I don't know if you've ever been watching TV and someone in your family is very, very engaged in what you're watching, and suddenly you change the channel. There's two very different viewing styles when you're watching video. There's sort of the communal type of family-oriented TV style, and there's the computer CPU type of personal one-on-one where you can skip around as much as you want. That is a very interesting dilemma for content deliverers, because basically you have to accommodate both of those viewing natures as much as you possibly can, and keep the quality up as much as you possibly can. So again, I think you asked the question, why are we doing this? I just read in The Economist that in Q4 of 2008, Nielsen reported a record 151 hours of TV being watched per household. That's actually an all-time high right now. It's a record high for many years now. So again, I don't think this is quite dead yet. Again, I think the user experience has to be one that matches TV, and the quality experience has to be one that matches TV as well.
And we just can't get there right now in terms of web delivery.
Well, I think that's one of the things that I think the user experience for the web delivery has to be very similar to that of TV. Again, for quality, for the ease of use, you turn on your TV, you pick what you want to watch, and you watch it. So again, you also come to expect a certain quality out of that. So I think we have to meet all those types of things before it can actually be very successful.
This is just interesting to me, because I kind of... hello, a gentleman's got a question. Well, wait a second here. Randy, can you walk over there with that microphone? Thank you. When you get this mic, sir, if you could just give us your name and your organization, we'd appreciate it.
How are you? Can you hear me? Okay. So what you're saying, he said... Okay, first speaker said live TV is not feasible. How far do you think it's behind as far as the technology? And are you aware of any companies that's doing it right now as far as streaming live television over the internet?
So your question is, you're talking about broadcast quality television on the internet live,
yeah.
not internet quality. Is that what you mean?
Broadcast 720.
Okay.
Standard definition.
The question is there anybody doing it, and how far away are we from it?
So I mean, I would say that there are probably some companies that are doing things like that, via the internet. I mean, it is possible to get the internet, a video feed, a decent quality internet feed via the internet. The issue though is to have that be the primary distribution mechanism for the mass population. The amount of the infrastructure that's in place today just wouldn't be able to support that many viewers.
There's a company over there showing live TV right now. On a 47-inch TV.
I'm sure that they are, but let's if you want to understand the problem, just think of the Victoria's Secret fashion show. When the first time they came out, every one of their servers crashed because everybody went to them. It's a difference between showing it at one booth here and having 100 million Americans tune in.
Right. I mean, to clarify, my point is that if we were going to look at replacing the mainstream distribution model that exists today via cable, via satellite, and put that in its entirety on the internet, the infrastructure that's in place wouldn't be able to support that.
Well, actually, let's. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I mean, we're starting to see that, right? March Madness has huge numbers, grows every year, right? And so, I mean, it's not HD, it's not 720p, but it's probably better than 480, right? And so everybody calls that HD on the web, but it looks pretty good, and we'll get there. But a lot of it, again, is about usage patterns, and we keep talking about it, but it's, who wants to pay another $99 for a box just to get a few channels? So it's about user choice, user selection. If you're okay using it on your computer, people are out there doing it now. It looks pretty good, and we're getting to the point where that scales.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. I appreciate you opening up that discussion because it is happening in a few places. So where are, in the TV distribution chain or the contribution chain, we starting to use the internet, the public internet, for some pieces of the puzzle, some pieces of the traditional television puzzle?
Yeah, so I mean, certainly, again, going to file-based solutions where you have content that you need to get from point A to point B, and it's not necessarily in a real-time fashion. You can easily put that on the internet, and people do that, using secure VPN connections, even Wi-Fi
Jeremy, just
connections.
a little louder, please.
People, using secure VPN and Wi-Fi connections, are doing that today. There's plenty of news agencies and journalists that will plug into a take their content and transfer it from their laptop. We at Genesis, for disaster recovery, have utilized real-time links, with high forward error correction enabled, and it does work. In a point-to-point environment on a contribution basis, you can use it. I wouldn't. It doesn't work perfectly. It's not 100%. Over a long period of time, but you can utilize it for disaster recovery type applications.
So one of the big problems also with doing things real time, especially in the news gathering space, is if you look at some of the very high quality field acquisition formats like XDCAM, P2, all these, and especially with HD, those are very low bandwidth or very small in size for a production workflow. But whenever you try to send it over the network, suddenly it becomes very, very huge. So it's actually very important.
Can you just slice into that a little bit? Production workflow versus the.
Sure, absolutely. If you're out in the field and you're shooting an event that needs to get back to the station, and you're doing HD in 100 megabits, for example, that's going to be very slow getting back to the station if you try to send that over the internet. However, there's actually a lot of very efficient transcoding. That's why we're very excited about the H.264 the format that we use, because you can actually achieve that same quality at much, much smaller bit rates. So, having very highly efficient transcoding and seamless in the workflow, that's actually very, very important. From your laptop out in the field, getting it back to the station, that has to be as efficient as possible. So one of the efficient ways to do it with today's bandwidth is to maintain the quality while making the bit rate much smaller.
Okay. Lance, do you want to? Because I'm sure Technicolor is probably pushing out some of these methods.
Yeah, I was going to say we use IP networks, both private and over the internet, to move up to 4K files for digital immediates around. So, I mean, you can do it. It's probably not the best and most reliable path from the contribution side. But on the distribution side, in case in point, the March Madness, people are using the internet for playout. We use it for backhaul for lower bitrate streams up to about 700 kilobits per second with quality of service, and then serve that out to customers and have a pretty good user experience. So I think we're starting to see it. It really comes down to how do you scale it. I mean, you wouldn't want to run, a massive news segment on some, late-breaking news story on it and have everything fall over. But in well-defined use cases, it actually works and scales pretty well right now.
Now, there's some business model questions that surround this. Just prior to this panel session, I was chatting with a friend of mine who said, and so I haven't read this myself, so I don't know if it's true, but he said that NBC is reconsidering some of its arrangements with Hulu about play-out of programming because they're coming to realize that that's turning into serious competition for cable, and ultimately, if the cable business gets damaged, it's going to damage them. And I'm just interested in that, if you could talk a little bit about the sort of the business model issues that surround this transition to web distribution, when there's a lot of existing businesses that live off some form of distribution or contribution?
I think you see. I mean, there's a lot of people that talk about trading analog dollars for digital pennies, dimes, nickels, etc. And it's a scale issue, and I keep coming back to you can't consume this stuff in your living room, which is where you want to consume most of it when you're sitting at home at night. You want to relax, and you've worked all day in front of a computer. You don't want to sit there and watch your news or your favorite show from NBC there. So I mean, there's clearly some rights issues. There's clearly some monetization issues, which, in my belief, are really around the scale of the audience right now via internet delivery technology. Do
you believe that? Because that tends to be my belief too. It's just the size of the audience.
It's the size of the audience. I mean, we're starting to see technology now for really good ad insertion, demographic targeting, whatnot. So I mean, the answer is there. It's really getting the consumer there. And I mean, Hulu is a great experience if you want it on your computer. And to the extent that it gets to your TV screen, then I think it becomes an even better experience for a lot bigger audience.
Interesting. Other thoughts on that?
Just as far as the business aspect of it, there's a couple of angles to look at the business aspect. There's making money on your content, but there's also being more efficient while you're developing your content and also creating content for multiple different devices and that sort of thing. I think if you want to be more efficient internally, bringing a lot of the things in house that you might farm out to contractors and that sort of thing, freelancers, to be able to encode for set-top boxes and take control over your own destiny as far as that's concerned is another way to actually save money and create content.
That's an interesting idea. Questions, comments from the audience? Yes, sir. You just give us your name and your organization.
My name is Chris. I'm with Adelaide Park. I'm curious about who is going to pay for all this. Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
There you go.
Yeah. If you were talking about trading analog dollars for digital pennies and web video in a way, especially Hulu, for example, kind of cannibalizing some of the content that the cable companies are used to getting tons of money for on traditional distribution methods. Where's the incentive for them to pay for any of this rollout and the new technology? And if there's no money going there, isn't this a moot point?
That's a very good question. Who wants to take a hack at that?
I'll take a first step. I think right now, obviously, the content creators are experimenting with it because consumers can find the content online anyway. So it's being cannibalized by people, encoding it off their TiVo or posting to the network and on peer-to-peer. So I mean, that cannibalization is occurring. So the question is, can they take some control of it and start to monetize it? Unlike kind of what happened in the music business, and then they had to go essentially sell their souls to Apple and now try to reclaim that again. So I mean, I think the content owners have to find a model that works for them. And back to the ad insertion piece, everybody's skipping ads on their DVRs right now. So I mean, that monetization model is only going to hold up for so long. So I mean, if you use Hulu, they have bugs on the screen and stuff. It's a lot less invasive, a lot more consumer friendly. It just needs to get to the point where consumers, respond to that and where they can get the right amount of scale around it, I think.
Anybody else want to? No, everybody's just nodding their heads. I think there's a lesson in history that maybe answers your question, which was a very interesting session put on in New York by the Society of Satellite Professionals. An interesting thing about advertising in HDTV, and what came out of it was something that certainly startled me. Several of the broadcasters said, we don't want to go to HDTV. And the advertiser said, we do not want to go to HD. You believe me, we don't want to go to. Are you kidding? It costs us a lot of money, and guess what? We don't earn 1 penny of additional revenue from it. Not 1 penny. Why would we want to do this? Because we have to. Because our customers are forcing us to do it, so we're going to do it. And I think this is going to turn out to be the same kind of thing, personally. It would be nice if there were additional gold in them our hills, but I'm not sure we're seeing it. Other questions or comments before we move on? Yes, sir. Oh, it's got to go a long way. I'm going to ask you to, once again, I'm going to ask you to say your name, your organization, and speak up nice and loudly.
Hi, my name is Matt, and I work for VCAM in Vermont. And I was just wondering if there's been any discussion with, broadcasters or whatever about using, you just mentioned, peer-to-peer file sharing to handle the amount of service you would have to use for everyone to be watching a show at the same time, rather than having everyone connecting to the host server using that structure. Is that
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know about specific conversations from the broadcasters, but I mean that's obviously a technology that holds promise to help distribute, whether it's files or even streams via the internet. Again, it kind of goes back to the lack of multicast and being able to multi-point out that content. And whether you use a CDN or you use a peer-to-peer solution in the interim. I mean, those are tools that will help facilitate the progression of content being distributed, via the internet. Yeah.
I guess one of the questions I'd ask in return is, when you say peer-to-peer, what do you mean? I mean, is peer-to-peer just that there's a lot of servers that I don't have to pay for because somebody else is loaning their use to me? Essentially, yeah. Isn't that what peer-to-peer is?
I'm not sure if I can answer. I'm not a
yeah. No,
panel,
nor am I.
I mean, as far as I understand it, is that if you have 10,000 people all watching a show coming from one server, then the first handful of people will start to download it, and the people that start to tag on after them are now grabbing it from all those people. So the bandwidth is the same, but the server is serving it. Absolutely, you're using servers from all over the place.
Right. So in other words, I could also, if I'm the News Corporation, I could just own those 10,000 servers, in which case it's mine. I mean, it's an interesting, again, business model question always behind the technology questions.
Obviously, the consumers have a totally different viewpoint.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
They just don't care. They just want it to be there, as well they should. Any other comments from people who want to jump in before we move on to my next one? Okay. Let's talk about fiber. Let's talk specifically about whether or not Verizon is going to be the savior of us all or the death of television. To some extent, we're talking about bandwidth, of course, and one solution to the bandwidth is to run fiber into your home and then switch to that interesting standard of IPTV. You talked about the problem of dial twisting, if you will, and of course the IPTV standard changes the dynamic. We no longer feed everything out. We just listen to what you want and we feed it to you. And is that going to, in your view, is that going to be a significant, is that going to have a significant impact on this transition? Everybody clear on that? I mean, IPTV is a very, very different model for distribution. We don't feed you 300 channels. We feed you one channel. And when you want a different channel, we receive your inquiry at our data center and we switch it and feed you a different channel. Go ahead.
So, I mean, as far as the content is concerned, the thing that worries me about that is in order for television to compete with the internet, there's going to have to be a whole lot more choice. Again, a variety of choices. So the more content there is, the bandwidth is only going to get so much better so quickly. So we're going to be working with the same amount of bandwidth for a little while. So again, we have to get more efficient and maintain that quality. I keep on talking about H.264, but I think H.264 is a very good way for us to go to in the broadcast world and IPTV world, because again, it's one of those formats that is now going across all different types of screens. H.264 is supported by Flash and Silverlight now, and for broadcast quality, it's great. So again, I think the more efficient that we can possibly make, the smaller we can make the video, the more we're going to be able to push things out to consumers and what they want to see. Because again, once you add that variety, people are going to be asking for a whole lot of stuff, which is it could potentially clog your network. So the more efficient you can be, the better.
I can't resist. Talk a little bit about H.2, whatever it is. Just give us the elevator pitch.
So basically, MPEG-2 is still around. It's going to be around for a little while. And basically, what H.264 is, it's an encoding method that basically allows you to maintain that same video quality, just in a different algorithm, to much lower bandwidth, much lower bit rate, but again, the same quality. So that's an extremely high-level view of H.264. But again, it's extremely, extremely flexible. Again, if you want to watch it on your iPhone, if you want to watch it in Flash or Silverlight or on a broadcast server, it's one of those common formats that stretches across all those different screens. And the format that we feel is actually going to hold the most promise.
And that's really the point, isn't it? The flexibility of it, as well as the power of it.
Again, being more efficient upstream, having the content providers giving them that flexibility to maintain control over the quality is the best way to go.
Lancer, is Technicolor involved at all in any of in IPTV world?
Yeah, so Technicolor certainly is from a content encoding perspective. We generate a lot of assets for playout for everyone from AT&T to a lot of folks overseas. So we prepare a lot of content in H.264. Thomson, which owns Technicolor, actually has a pretty large set-top box group and does a lot with H.264 implementations in the set-top boxes. So it's definitely a trend that we're seeing as people are going to move towards it. But I think MPEG 2 has a decent lifespan left in it for the time being.
Do you see it, though, because you started using some of those magic words about managing elements, do you see this as kind of driving forward this transformation in how we get television someplace? Because it's an AT&T or a Verizon have kind of an interesting and funny relationship with the content owners. It's not just like a cable television system. It's not just like an affiliate. Do you see that beginning to change this world?
I think it has to change. The question is how quickly it can change or how slowly it will change. But it will. I mean, clearly, the telcos, even the MSOs, nobody wants to be just a big fat pipe to consumers, right? They want to try to do value add. You know, the whole idea of linear programming and channel lineups to me is antiquated and needs to go away because consumers don't actually consume content that way, with the exception of sporting events and sometimes news. And so this idea of kind of moving from a broadcast model to an a la carte or to an on-demand model, I think it's already happening at the consumers' homes. The question is, how do we take advantage of that in the delivery mechanisms? And so there's a lot of ways you can do that. I mean, you can track what usage models, what shows your consumers like, and you can only deliver those to their home. You don't have to push everything out, which obviously IPTV does. But I mean, just as a poll in the room, who watches live TV other than sports? If you exclude sports, who does not use time shifting or DVR?
So which way you want to say? Who does not?
Who does not?
Who does not? Who does not use time shifting? Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Wow.
So, I mean, we all want our content when we want it, and we want to see it. And I'd be curious, in terms of news in the audience, who watches news time shifted versus live? Live.
Couple.
So
a few.
Folks, yeah. There's a clear preference for consumers, right, to watch almost everything but news and sports when they want to watch it. So why deliver it to everyone all the time when it's not being watched that way is my challenge.
Jeremy, you want?
Well, just no. I mean, that is kind of the point. And should you take that bandwidth and reallocate it to the internet or to IP type services, and you do open up a tremendous amount of capacity for the consumer to be able to pick what they want and have a large, a much bigger universe of content to choose from.
Let's have some fun. Let's speculate. Because after all, the great thing about making forecasts I've learned is that nobody remembers you made them, so you never have to defend them in the future. I think what we're beginning to talk about here is a tipping point issue. At some point, the model is going to run out, and we're going to have this interesting infrastructure that isn't quite, thank God, most of it will be sunk costs because we're going to need to rebuild it. I read something in the Times, New York Times, sorry, about a month ago, which may or may not be true. But this particular writer said that in his view, the major broadcast networks could really today no longer afford to make another Grey's Anatomy. They could no longer afford to make another House because they could never get the money back from the advertising model anymore. And instead, that kind of originality was going to increasingly transition to the HBOs of the world, who have a multi-tiered revenue model. So right, and of course, I don't know if it's true or not, but what this writer was suggesting was that the tipping point is here. It's already here. So the tipping point in terms of the distribution, the consumption of media that's delivered by a traditional means versus delivered by web means, where is that? How far away is that? As I say, you never can get punished for speculating.
I think to a certain extent it's here, but it's not to a scale enough where people can find ways to monetize that content outside of it. There's just not that audience there. So when will it come? It will come when you can get a set-top box either for free or something that lets you consume all of this content on your TV via IP. Maybe that comes from a Verizon or someone else that wants to break into that space in a really strong way, or maybe the MSOs kind of do some experiments or whatnot. But I think to a certain extent it's here. You're seeing a lot more reality TV shows, which obviously cost the networks a lot less to produce than a Grey's Anatomy, and so the pressure is there to kind of figure this out quickly. It could be, if I had to guess, I think it'll be 2013 or so before we really start seeing folks consume greater than 50% of their content. I'm talking about people of my age and whatnot.
Right. Now, Jeremy, this is not just an academic exercise for your company, because this is actually where your revenue comes from. So, in terms of as you look at these issues internally, what are you guys thinking about?
Well, I mean, yeah. So there is a live component to television that will always be live. Sports is a big. Nobody wants to watch a sports game after it's over. If they already know the score. I mean, you watch, you're engaged in that live event. So that's a large portion of our business. So I mean, we're comfortable that that's going to stay in place. For many years. With respect to the distribution via the internet or to the end user, from our perspective, we help facilitate getting the content from wherever it originates, from wherever it starts. So to the extent that we're delivering to some IPTV platform or via a cable system, there is still a lot that needs to happen in the workflow to get content from its source, from the studio or from wherever it originated to where it's actually going to be distributed, whether that be via the internet or whether that be a Comcast or a DirecTV.
And Jonathan, your company is helping to make this happen. So
yeah, absolutely. I think it's a generational thing. When is it going to happen? I was trying to remember where I read this, but I read somewhere that people between the ages of 18 and 25 now use the television as a second or even third means of actually getting information. So I think it is a generational thing. I think it's going to trail off. I don't think it's immediate. The tipping point, I'm not sure if we're at a tipping point quite yet. But again, I think it's the traditional TV broadcast is probably going to fade away as users do, believe it or not.
You notice I couldn't get the engineer to name a date. They're precise people. They're precise people. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I was just curious, as far as availability or access, how does it compare? I'm kind of biased because I live in a city and everybody has access to high-speed internet, but across the country, how does the availability to television or even cable compare to the availability to high-speed internet to be able to do this, and how does that factor into the amount of effort that broadcasters are putting into switching over? Does that make sense?
Oh, very much so. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, and I mean, I think portions of this discussion we touched on the fact that given the the local cable system, if you took a step back and you actually looked at the amount of capacity that's being delivered to these homes via cable infrastructure, it's significant. And should the investment be made to shift that capacity to an IP platform and open that capacity up to the internet, you could very quickly facilitate that delivery, that type of delivery to the end user. But that's just not something that, I mean, from from a business standpoint, that's just not going to happen overnight. And there's a lot that would have to happen for that for any local infrastructure to try and make that type of a change.
I think weren't you also suggesting a public interest question, which is that ultimately television and radio are extremely important information delivery tools in rural markets, and don't those people have a right to them?
Right, and that's the market I'm talking about, is the really rural areas. I mean, I'm wondering, because I just don't know what kind of access you have in the boonies in, I don't know, Nebraska or somewhere mountainous, where I know that there are even places in Vermont where I'm from where you can't get internet unless you pay $30,000 to get a T1 line run to your house from somewhere, and they're literally 2 miles out of town. Well, but they don't even have that access.
The estimate from Wild Blue is there's about 20 to 25 million Americans who are outside the range of broadband, meaning economically outside the range of broadband. So it's not an insignificant number.
Right. That was what I was wondering.
Yeah.
I think one of the questions is, do you reuse that spectrum for some form of IP delivery that's could conceivably more efficient, and then have some number of obviously broadcast channels as well that kind of reapportion that bandwidth and use it where there's a receiver listening but only catches what you want and whatnot.
I'm sure that Hughes and Wild Blue would be very happy to help.
So I mean, is that what you were saying, is that if you're receiving your television over cable, they're delivering a lot more bandwidth than if you were going to use an IP structure that only delivered the one that you chose?
Correct. Yeah.
So what you're getting from cable, is that what you just said, that they could totally reapportion that and deliver so much less at a time, giving more people access at a time and you can still get what you wanted just by choice.
Giving you more choice, right?
Or giving right. Okay.
Yeah. But not even just cable, even over the air, right? So.
Thank you. That was a cool speculative question. Are there any others? Let's talk about another elephant in the room, which is, of course, the content. I think it was. Yeah, sure. I think it was Lance who referenced that interesting thing that the content owners, of course, are being driven into sharing a lot of their content online, and because they don't want to have done to them what got done to the music industry. And I wonder what the role of concerns over intellectual property are in, again, this transition to having everything delivered over the web, because we seem to be having a fair amount of trouble making the web a secure environment. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that, and about how you have to deal with this already in terms of the concerns that your customers have in handing over content to you or having your technology used for the distribution of their content.
There's obviously multiple bars for content protection. I mean, the studios, in terms of theatrical releases, have a much higher bar than television networks. In particular, once that content's aired, it's very much free reign to anybody can get to it. So. The good news is there are technologies out there. I mean, you have DRM from multiple companies, which is obviously akin and parallel to conditional access systems. So the technology's there. The real issue when it comes to DRM is interoperability for consumers across multiple devices, whether it's your iPod or your Zune player or whatever else. And so the consumers want it to work anytime, anywhere, any place, but you have to balance that with the protection of the content, and particularly the studio content. But in terms of television content, I think as long as you can impose some basic rules around it, I think most of the networks are happy as long as there's a monetization element that can be enforced.
Really? Because you think we can do a good job of protecting this content? Because boy, young people I know seem to spend an awful lot of time busting it open.
I mean, it's always just a speed bump, right? I mean, there's always analog out. You can always capture it. So I mean, it's really just to keep honest people honest, as some people would say, and most people, from the studies I've seen and just the folks I know in the industry, are willing to pay for that content, whether it's they're paying for it or they're paying for it via the ad supported in it, as long as they can get it in the time and when they want it. And all these workarounds, people ripping DVDs, etc., is really just 99% of people they want to get it on their iPod so they can show their kids a movie on the airplane. If they could pay 99 cents for it, they would. If it comes via digital copy, which a lot of the studios are now doing, that's great.
Other gentlemen, like to hear from you.
It's actually something interesting. There's a lot of technologies, I think, that allow you to, during the encoding process, add watermarking, add encryption and that sort of thing. But there really is no. It's a good point that there's no really set standard yet. So that really causes problems for the consumer downstream, because again, you might have a certain device that it doesn't work for, so there's all kinds of problems around that. So there's also additional problems with also enforcement of that. If somebody does actually crack something open, or you make invisible watermarks, okay, you're going to go knock on some person's door and say, listen, you've got my content. It's very hard to enforce. Therefore, I think the digital copy is also a very good example of how people have sort of bobbed and weaved with the times. I think that the whole business model is going to have to change. Things like that are going to go a long way as well.
Jeremy, anything you want to add?
No, I mean, I pretty much agree with the fact that the technology is there to keep people from wildly ripping off the content, and the fact of the matter is, I mean, it's accessible. It will be accessible after the day of air anyway for television, because of the somebody could just take a video camera to the TV screen and put it up on the internet. But if you make it easier, you provide high quality, and allow people to actually get the content that they want when they want it. That ease of use is going to turn into that person being willing to pay for that show or movie or whatnot.
I like that phrase, analog out. I'm going to steal it. We have a question.
Frank Aycock, Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina.
Touche.
My question, I guess, is more of a comment. It seems to me that probably the easiest way to deal with copyright questions and intellectual property is simply to charge the folks through the ISPs and others for that, for the content.
Sounds great in theory, but I think, let me see, one company's figured out how to do it, called Apple. The Wall Street Journal gave up on it for their model, and I don't think, has anybody else made it work? It's a really interesting dynamic. I agree with you. When I first heard that TiVo came out, I thought, oh, that's it, broadcast is over, and now we'll all just pay 10 cents to watch, whatever it is, but it hasn't happened yet.
Are you talking about from a measurement perspective?
Actually, what I'm talking about is just simply if, much as the way the cable model is for the content, why not run it the same way through your ISPs and make it available only in that way? I believe Comcast was actually working on that. They got sort of stymied by the government, but I believe Comcast and some of the others are working on exactly that same model.
There are actually some experiments in Australia going on at the moment around that, which is essentially trying to measure the movement of content via fingerprinting and whatnot, and then ultimately with the idea of billing back the consumer for that. Again, to me that's an edge case. There are a bunch of people that are doing that either because they can't get the content in the format they want it, or some of them are legitimately pirating the content. But it still doesn't solve making it easy for consumers to get the content where they want, which is really what's driving a lot of that.
Other questions or comments? Sir.
My name is Fitz Rutherford with Live Eye Media. I see you guys talking about a lot of the domestic programming. What about the international programming platforms, something like a Jump TV? I see a lot of people are looking at international channels for distribution to the U.S., and there are a lot of people who are moving off satellite, like the World TV platform that Globecast has, into an IPTV setting. How do you see that adoption of those channels going into that platform affecting the business?
It's a good question, Fitz. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. At the end of the day, it comes down to the content. The early adopters of IPTV platforms are the ethnic channels and basically content that's just not available on Comcast or DirecTV. You're absolutely right. We spent a lot of time talking about the movement and the migration of the what we consider domestic traditional television over to an IP platform. Today absolutely IPTV is here and is available for consumers that want content that's not available anywhere else. It's being made readily available on the internet. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Gentlemen, he said it. Huh? He got it all.
He's got it.
You happy with that? Well, but wait, hold on, wait. But you didn't answer the question. Wait a minute. So, the question is really, what is the impact this is having? Is this another chink in the armor that we're now having a set of unique content available increasingly? Well, a major provider deciding that they're going to put more emphasis on delivering it via IP. Randy, can you give him the mic? Oh, he's got the microphone. How do they get paid for that? Do you have any idea?
Basically, it's advertising and predictive analytics. They're getting paid on the advertising. But you also have an incidence that you had Sky Angel, which was a direct-to-home platform that went all IP. So there is a shift on specialty and international channels to that format. Okay. And I think that's going to continue based on the predictive analytics and the advertising models that are out there.
So what you're suggesting is it's the tip of an iceberg. You're beginning to that's a place where we're seeing the wave of change. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Other comments, questions? I believe it's already been raised, this issue of how the fact that we consume it differently. We're not consuming in real time except for live events. Never mind. I'm not going to do that question because we've already covered it. Let's just speculate again. We're coming back here in 3 years. We're going to do this session again. What are we going to be? Are we going to be talking about the same things? Are we going to be saying, "Gosh, it's out there somewhere. We don't know what it is," or are we going to be saying, "Well, gosh, now we finally are beginning to see scale happening, and the emergence of something meaningful"? Let's say it's 3 years out.
I think we'll start to see it then. Going back to my 2013 number, so in 2012, yeah. You're starting to see this internationally. If you look at BBC with their iPlayer, their catch-up TV service is huge. I don't know how it compares to people watching live broadcasts, but I mean, it's happening. It's just happening with the early adopters first, and I keep going back to, not everybody wants to watch it on their little laptop screen or in their den. They want to watch it in their living room, their big screen TV, and so when we get that solved, whoever pays for those devices, whether they're built into the TVs or not, that's when we'll really start to see the change. And maybe the advertisers have to pay for it somehow as a box. I mean, that's what's got to happen for us to hit the tipping point. But I think we'll see much more of it come 2012 if we had this conversation then.
I agree that the European market actually is a little farther along with this than we are. However, there's a lot of public broadcasters that don't that provide their content as a public service rather than charging for ad revenue. So again, I think in three years when we come back here, I think you're going to see a lot of experimentation that's happened. I think you're going to see a lot of people that are changing out their infrastructure to accommodate more of this. And I think that you're going to see, hopefully, a business model that's starting to roll out that makes sense for traditional broadcasters.
Oh, that makes sense for traditional broadcasters.
Yeah. That's right.
Okay, good. I like that. Jeremy?
You can use that one, too, if you want.
So, I mean, in 3 years' time, I mean, I definitely agree that they'll be the set-top boxes will be there. People will have the ability to take in that content via the internet. More content will be available. I think the quality, there will be a quality issue though, and I think the Comcast and the Verizon Fioses of the world are going to make a strong push on that. The quality of the video signals that they will be able to deliver on their traditional medium, and I think that is going to have an impact on how quickly it gets adopted and how quickly people are willing to change out the infrastructure and go strictly on IP. So I think that the traditional model will be alive and well in 3 years' time.
You just suggested something really interesting. Are you going to go there? Go ahead.
Well, where I was going to go is that you're exactly right with the infrastructure piece. I mean, right now, especially in the United States, we are very MPEG-2 oriented, and that actually means a lot of transcoding to get down. There's a lot of time involved in order to get down to the bandwidth that we actually need to get to achieve being where we need to be. Again, I think that the quicker that we can start changing over the infrastructure. There's been some great advantages, some new things that have come out with MPEG-2, but I don't think that's going to be the platform of choice going forward. And unfortunately, most of the infrastructure that we have here in the United States is based on MPEG-2. So the change needs to start happening right now in order for us to be anywhere in 3 to 5 years.
That isn't where I thought you were going. What occurred to me as you were speaking, Jeremy, was that there's the potential for a sort of a two-tier viewership to emerge. If we can all get the web video on our home sets, our television sets, well, I can choose. I can choose to receive lower quality. I can already get YouTube over my DVR, and I once spent an hour doing this, and I thought, who the hell is watching this stuff? But somebody is, and people are loving it. That's fine. So I guess maybe I would typify myself as the quality viewer, and maybe I'm willing to pay for that, and maybe there's a bunch of offerings I'm not willing to pay for. That's interesting.
I mean, you see that with music, right? We've gone from lossless CDs to MP3s, and most consumers are okay with that. There's still some audio files out there that, want it in native format. But I mean, you see that. Most consumers really don't care that much. I mean, they like their HDTVs. They like to brag about having an HDTV, and sports and some of that content looks really good. But I mean, I think, if it's a matter of convenience and cost, that tends to win.
Yeah.
So, there's always going to be somebody that wants to pay for the top end of the stuff. But if it's cheaper and you can get it easier, for most people, that's what works.
Okay, so that's something to look for. I think that's something to look for. Are we going to the evolution of a two-tier home delivery market for video on your television set? I'm getting ready to wrap this up. So if there's questions or comments, now is your chance. You got some smart people up here. Yes, sir. Randy? Randall? There he is. We're hearing again from Boone. And by the way, I was just down visiting Southwestern in Appalachia, down visiting Bristol, and their 400-mile fiber network's pretty darn impressive. Go ahead.
What does all this mean for the local TV stations?
Great question. Okay, so now we got to keep in mind all the things we've said. and the fact that we've got, in addition to a bunch of physical infrastructure, we've got affiliates all across the country. So what is all this going to mean for them?
So, one of the things, everyone has a favorite TV station, right, in your local area. So I think what needs to happen is there's more of that content that needs to be delivered more quickly to other things, into the cloud, into the internet. Right now, if you look at how broadcast is done, there's sort of a linear process dependency. I can't do my job until you do yours, that sort of thing. But there's going to be more and more breaking news, as you see now, actually on the internet rather than on the, disrupting the TV, because you're still charging for people at a certain time on TV. And you can also say we were the first people to break this story, right? As long as you get it on the internet first. So I think you're going to see for the local TV affiliates, there's a lot more content, more original content that's going to hit mobile phones and also the internet. That it's going to be specially designed for that, and also a special demographic group. I think you're also going to see, as you actually are seeing it now, a lot of the newspapers in your local environment go to that same method. So that they're going to do a lot more video, and they're going to hit the internet and mobile phones with their stories rather than print as well.
Really interesting. Any other views on that? Because that's a pretty critical path question for this business. Great question. Gentleman at the back. Oops, the gentleman in the middle.
I was going to make a comment that I think there might be 3 ways of delivering within the next 3 years. You have internet webcasting. YouTube's going to take advantage of the news, because when they start off the top of the hour and they tease you with a story that is going to show up at the bottom of the hour, you can go right to YouTube and get that story right now. So that's, instead of TiVo zapping commercials, now YouTube's zapping the anchors. So that's one delivery way. Then you have the people that are in the urban areas that have access to Fios. They're going to get better quality download streams, live TV. That's going to develop that way. I'm thinking about what the other gentleman said about the 25 million people who live off the grid. Now, how are they going to get delivery? Now, instead of packaging a 1/2 hour or a 1 hour Grey's Anatomy for them, how about having the network take an entire Thursday night slate and put it onto Blu-ray? Now, who cares for these people who are off the grid whether they get Thursday night programming on Friday? So there's a possibility of 3 different ways of delivering content in the future. And if you're somehow iTunesing it or somehow selling them Thursday night on NBC for $1 or $10 or whatever, you can fill that full of all the advertising you need to keep it profitable.
Wow, thank you. There was another question in the back.
Yeah, I was wondering, is this conference going to be webcast on a website?
Yes, it is, right? It's being streamed right now, and you'll be able to find it on the sites of the World Teleport Association and the Society of Satellite Professionals, and there's some literature right there that'll give you the web addresses.
Is that the top pamphlet?
Yeah, just you'll be able to tell when you get there.
Okay, thanks.
My pleasure. Okay, this has been, I think it's been a pretty interesting hour. I've certainly enjoyed myself. Just some thoughts I jotted down here in terms of, what's it going to take? How are we going to get there? Well, the issues, okay, bandwidth for live events, the lack of true multicast on the web. How are we going to address that? The issue of the home. We've got to be able to deliver ultimately everything to that home television screen, because that's where I want to go at the end of the day. I do spend a lot of hours in front of the PC screen, and I just as soon not spend my evenings there. There's the issue of how do you get paid? What's going to go? Where's the advertising model going? Are there new business models? Basically pay-per-view at pennies that may work out. And finally, the issue of we need broadband everywhere if we're going to do this, because there has been from its various beginnings, broadcast has been partly about the public interest, and we have to make sure that continues to be served. And I think that's true in the United States, and it's true everywhere. Gentlemen, I would like to thank you, and I hope the audience will join me in thanking you for a very interesting hour.